Anna and Monica and I, like, we know it's kind of like an odd thing that we're trying to do, but I swear it's good.
Hello everyone, this is John Moore from the Denver Center, and welcome to a very special edition of Running Lines, our audio podcast with Ira Glass.
Everybody kind of gets along, like nobody pulls a knife, you know what I mean? Like nobody, you know, like at no point is like poison gas released in the office and then we all have to flee for our lives. Like nothing dramatic ever happens in this office.
Talk about an American life. On Saturday, December 7th, the Denver Center will welcome for one night only the iconic voice of Ira Glass for a very special one-night-only performance in the Buell Theater that is titled Ira Glass, 3 acts, 2 dancers, 1 radio host. Welcome, Ira.
Thank you for having me.
I bet. I'm going to try to do my best Terry Gross here for the next 10 minutes.
Okay.
And I'm sure I won't do her justice. I think a good place to start would be right off the top to have you tell us what indeed 2 art forms that have no business together, dance and radio, do indeed have some business being together.
I have a shared sensibility with these dancers. 3 years ago, I saw them perform, and I don't go to a lot of dance, but I've seen dance before, and there was something in the way that they choreograph and do their pieces that reminded me a lot of the sensibility of the radio show, even though they're working in a medium with no words and I'm working in a medium that's all words. And partly it was just that they were funny. They were funny and self-deprecating in the dances they did on stage, and the dances seemed to be about documenting these very small human moments of awkwardness. I don't know, there was something in the mix of we're going to document our real feelings at human scale, and also we're going to make something that's super fun to watch that made me want to work with them, because that's obviously what we're trying to do on the radio show.
What was it like for you at Carnegie Hall when you stepped out on a stage after so many years behind the mic?
I mean, we had never performed this at all for anyone, and then there was a benefit that was happening at Carnegie Hall, and I was asked, do you have something you could do that would be 10 minutes long? And I was like, I just started working on this dance show. And they're like, great. And so Monica, Bill Barnes, and Anna Bass, the 2 dancers, and I, took one of the pieces where I tell stories and they dance, and then we had never performed this before anyone, and then suddenly we were at Carnegie Hall in a show with Patti Smith and Philip Glass and a bunch of other acts. Philip's my cousin, and it was kind of amazing to do. It was first of all, just to be in that famous room is really something, and then to be on the stage of that famous room is crazy. And then the fact that it went over, we started at Carnegie Hall, that was our debut, and we brought down the house, we killed it. We killed at Carnegie Hall, and then since then we're bringing it to smaller venues. So bringing it to Denver is kind of I feel like usually you should do it the other way. You should play Denver and then on your way to Carnegie Hall, but we're kind of on our way in the other direction. And when we're done, we'll be working at a little coffee shop. We'll be presenting it in a coffee shop in Seattle, as people drink their lattes.
I don't want to make you nervous or anything, but it is 2,800 people.
I have to say, the Carnegie Hall thing was so frightening. I think nothing can scare me more than that did. Yeah.
Well, what is it like for you when you find a real comfort zone behind the microphone to really to challenge yourself to be able to get up on a stage and be in front of live people?
I mean, it is really different. It is really different, being in a radio studio, talking basically in a room where I'm talking to no one, and you know what I mean? It's just me sitting there in a chair, pretending that I'm talking to real people who I know kind of in an abstract way are out there, but they aren't there.
Yeah.
To going to a place like the Denver Center where, there's so many people, it's really fun to be in front of people. It's fun to be on stage. It's fun to try to say something funny and to actually, if people laugh, then it went well. Versus on the radio where you say something you think is funny, you just think okay, I hope that went over.
Yeah.
So it's really energizing. I'm excited to do it. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm sure it's going to be a natural draw for any fans of your radio show. But who do you think is the audience for this one night only presentation?
Well, that is the problem, is that there is no natural audience for a show of dance and radio stories. There was no, the saying, backed by popular demand. There was no popular demand for this at all. There's no assuming, like, my hope is that anybody who likes the radio show will come, and there's tons and tons of people in Denver and around Denver. In the last few months, I've given talks up in Colorado Springs and been to Boulder. And I tried to tell people, like, come out to this show. Like, if you like our radio show, I think you'll like this as well. But I harbor no illusions. Like, I don't think that, like, anybody's ever listened to the show and thought, like, you know what he needs is some dancers. Then this would really be great. I feel like this is one of my favorite things I've ever been in. Like I feel like, and it's really fun to perform too. It's exciting to perform. It's very emotional. It's a very emotional, funny show.
Interesting. People have to go check it out just to find out what it is we're talking about. But now, Ira, if there were two of you and you were producing a segment on Ira Glass for This American Life, what would you say was the most compelling hook to do a story on you?
For things to work as a story on This American Life, they have to be really surprising. And my problem is, my life is not so surprising. So, truthfully, like, my problem is, like, my life isn't interesting enough to do a story about it on my own radio show. And the last time I did a story about myself, or we had a story about me, was about my dog. I have this rescue pit bull that my staff insisted to me, like, the way that you're raising that dog is insane. I was like, I don't see what the story is. They're like, no. Like, and then one of our producers sat me down in the studio and interviewed me about the dog, because she insisted, like, when you lay out the facts of this, you will see that what you're going through is very unusual.
You mentioned your first cousin, Philip Glass, who's appeared on your show. Your mother was called the godmother of infidelity research.
My mom was a therapist and a researcher, a psychologist.
And you're a Jewish man who married an Arab woman. That just sounds to me like you were pretty much destined to live an interesting American life.
It does sound really good when you line it up that way, I guess.
Well, I know everybody's waiting for me to talk to you about This American Life, so I'll just tell people that you've hosted it all but 4 episodes since 1995. The show's been nationally syndicated since June 1996 and now reaches more than 1.7 million listeners on over 500 stations weekly. In July, you celebrated your 500th episode.
And now we reach 1 million people by our podcast. Our podcast has gotten so big.
That's incredible. I think the reason that I love This American Life so much is that it feels like I'm listening to a great novelist reciting his fiction, like it's a book on tape, but it's actual journalism and the real life in America. Can you sort of describe what chord you think this struck in America and why it's had such endurance?
I feel like you're saying exactly the perfect thing, and honestly, like, the nicest thing somebody could say about the show. I mean, I feel like the appeal of the show is just that they're stories, like in a very old-fashioned way. And we look really hard, I and the producers of the show, we look really hard for stories that we think will just be relatable and gripping and surprising, and we spend a lot of time trying to shape them so they maximize, the power and the feeling that they can have. But in the end, like, I feel like what we're doing is a very old-fashioned kind of thing, which is, like, stories are really fun to hear, and it's something that radio is built for, and podcasts are built for.
If it's okay, I want to single out one episode that I think our listeners would be particularly interested in hearing some of the backstory about. It was back a ways. It's called Act 5. Your contributing reporter followed a group of inmates at a high-security prison in Missouri for 6 months as they rehearsed and staged a production of the last act of Hamlet. And that was like 1990. Do you remember that episode? And
of course.
It's such an interesting concept. The Denver Center is about to stage Hamlet itself, and so I really wanted to get your thoughts on a bunch of inmates getting the opportunity to perform that play, brought out truths that you don't even necessarily see in professional productions.
I mean, what was interesting about that production was most of the guys who were in that production of Hamlet had themselves been convicted on murder charges. Mm-hmm. And Hamlet is a play where a person is debating the entire play whether or not he should commit a murder. Well, these are people who had actually gone through that decision process and decided yes. And they all had really interesting thoughts about the decision he makes. And also, they had really interesting thoughts about the play. I remember one of the guys, this big guy named Hutch. He played Horatio, and he was really bitter because he's just like, well, this guy is just there for exposition. Like, he's supposed to be Hamlet's best friend, but he's Hamlet's best friend. Hamlet would be confiding in him. They would have a whole different kind of relationship. But in fact, Shakespeare just uses him to advance the plot. It's sort of like that. And when you look at it, that's very, very true. You know,
a literary scholar.
Seriously, and then many of them had moments in the play that really resonated with things in their own experience. And there's a moment in the play where Hamlet, or somebody says, Denmark is a prison. And one of the prisoners pointed out, well, that's true, but it's also true that a prison is a lot like Denmark, is a lot like the court that Hamlet's in. He says, if you think about like all the places in the world where there still is a completely hierarchical society where everybody knows everybody's status and everybody has a role to play. You're the king, you're the jester, you're the fool, you're the hanger-on, you know, you're the suck-up who wants to be near power. It's like one of the places where that happens in a really vivid way is in prison, and you're always aware of your status, and honor is a real thing in a way where Hamlet's story, I remember one of the prisoners said this, like it couldn't happen in the outside world as easily as it could happen in a prison. In a prison, if somebody kills someone close to you, as Hamlet's father gets killed, like if you don't strike back, like then you get marked. You know, people start picking on you and abusing you, and you could end up dead too. And so like killing for honor is a real thing in their lives, and defending yourself for honor, and in a way that it is, you know, for the characters in Shakespeare. And honestly, like I had never thought about any of that. If anything, like when I had read Hamlet, I did not like it as a play. Like I've always thought, like reading Hamlet, well, who do you relate to here? You know what I mean? Like somebody killed your dad, and you have to decide if you're going to commit revenge. Like I don't relate to that at all. I've always considered it just a real bore. Mm-hmm. Like I know that's a weird thing to say about a Shakespeare play, like one of the big classics, but I just felt like I did, you know, just at the most basic level of what you want from a play, like you want to feel something and you want to relate to the characters. I just felt like I never got any of that, and I feel like talking to those guys gave me a way inside the emotion of the play that I'd never had.
I think that's exactly it. I think everybody who is about to perform the play as an actor should listen to that episode. But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, what was cooler for you, appearing on season 22 of The Simpsons in Elementary School Musical, or recently appearing in a music video with Yoko Ono?
Yoko Ono. And no knock against The Simpsons, but Yoko Ono, clearly. For one thing, when you record The Simpsons, you know, you just basically go to a little, they book you into a studio somewhere, and you sit there, and then you talk to a guy in California, and he has you read your lines a couple of times, and then, you know, you have the experience, which is amazing, of like hearing your voice in the middle of The Simpsons, which is crazy. But that's very, very different than going to, like, where they're shooting a video, and Yoko Ono's there, and the Beastie Boys, and Roberta Flack, and like, you know what I mean, like that. Like those aren't the kind of people who, as a radio documentary, public radio person, who I ever meet or hang out with. So I think that was just kind of like another day at the job for them, but it was like a very unusual day for me.
Well, Ira, I want to thank you for spending some time with us, and as we leave, I'm going to tell people who are listening that you are coming to Denver on December 7th at the Buell Theater, and tickets can be had by calling 303-893-4100 or by going to www.denvercenter.org.